I'm joined by Jessiah from Pondering Politics for this segment. Kari Lake is a disaster, and she did a speech at CPAC. I want to look at that. Then we'll get to some devastating news. We do. Do we have to? Hush up. We're doing it, Jessiah. Talked about this before. And she, right now, is getting news about her campaign that's not so great, and we'll get to that as well. So potentially that's why she's so bizarre in this CPAC speech. So first, this.
Ideology. I like a strong man. We got way too many weaklings out there. Let me hear from the ladies out there. We're tired of the beta men. We want some alpha men. And we got a #1 alpha man in Donald J. Trump.
So, wow. I think there's two things on this. First, really, are we not beyond like elementary school, alpha, beta? Just grow up. But
that's not what somebody with cooties would say right there.
Exactly. Ew, you have cooties.
You're stupid.
Beta male. But also, let's talk about it, Josiah. Let's talk about alpha, beta, sigma, whatever the different terms are. If anyone in the history of the United States has been anything but what I think they mean an alpha male to me, the most sensitive, the most snowflakey, the most weak fee-feed person, proofed by the fact that Donald Trump, because he couldn't just be a man and accept that he lost the 2020 election like all of these other presidents have been able to do, suck it up, you lost, move forward. Instead, he created an anti-democratic lie, then tried to overthrow the democratic results of this election, then to this day is pushing an authoritarian agenda because he doesn't want to have to, in his own brain, just go, listen, sometimes people lose, let's move forward, like an adult. And that's how sensitive, that's how much of a beta, that's so annoying, sorry, Trump is. That now he's convinced his followers, just for that reason back there, to say they'd rather a dictator in Trump than a democratically elected Joe Biden.
And by the way, what about all the high-profile recent defeats that Donald Trump has had under his belt, right? So you have the fact that he was found liable for sexual abuse and defamation and is going to have to pay E. Jean Carroll tens of millions of dollars. What about the New York civil fraud case in which he's going to have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for defrauding the state of New York? What about all those elections that he's lost? Like all of them but one, right? Congratulations, you won in 2016. You didn't win the popular vote, and you won the Electoral College thanks to a critical assist from FBI Director James Comey, all right? But you lost in 2018. You lost in 2020. You lost in 2021 with the Republican Senate runoffs. You lost in 2022. You lost in 2023.
Alpha male's just losing out here.
That is a heck of a beta impression from such an alpha, right? So gross. And guys, that's just one clip.
Ugh. I'll only subject you to one more, then we'll get to the bad Kari Lake news. Here it is.
Listen, I want low unemployment numbers like we had with President Trump, but I'm okay if we have high unemployment in the fake news. Maybe you guys, once your fake news operations collapse, maybe you guys can go learn to code. Maybe they can learn to code.
So good, so witty. She's so clever.
You know, if the whole being governor thing, because she's still waiting on that to happen, the rightful results, and if the Senate thing doesn't work, she could definitely do stand-up comedy.
The problem would be packing that ring light up with her microphone.
And say mega filter, do it over Zoom.
Yeah.
So, listen, I don't understand. So I just did. Let me back up. Show's coming out on Sunday. And it's called Deprogrammed. And it's where I sit down for an entire day, and then we slurp that, solidify that down, there we go, to just a quick, this is not making me laugh, to just a quick episode where you see the little highlights of me throughout the day trying to convince these two Trump supporters to denounce Trump. You'll see how it turned out on Sunday. And during that, especially these two Trump supporters were especially uninformed, I'll say, with love. And
Uninformed Trump
stunningly-
supporters, you say? Uninformed Trump supporters?
It was like a unicorn. It was crazy.
Okay.
And one of the things was on economic things. A bunch of people have said to me, they said, Luke, tears pouring down their face. They said, sir, why is unemployment high? And they did this with their hands too. And I don't know what to do with that. As I said in a previous segment, there are facts in this world. Then there's MAGA world. And how do you, just in case you're one of those people confused, unemployment has been lower for longer than we've seen in 50 years, sub 4% for 2 straight years. That's stunningly low.
And that's under Biden. Joseph Robinette Biden, the current president.
Brandon.
The current president of the United States.
And she sort of premised that joke off of, we would love to see low unemployment like we had under Trump. What about the better unemployment under Joe Biden?
Right. Why do you want higher unemployment?
Oh,
right.
You
Exactly.
hate the American people?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you America hater? Go to some other country if you hate America so much.
I mean, 100. Like when Donald Trump left office, like unemployment was upwards of 6%. Right. I mean, he left office with a net deficit of job loss. Right. So it's a completely alternate universe. I will say, Luke, she talks about unemployment. If she's looking for a job in the Senate, I don't know if that's looking so good for her right now.
Segue and a half. Love to see it. So just in case you're wondering, sometimes I'll hear these sorts of things and the whole fake news thing is so worn out. I'm so brave because I'm going to point at a bunch of cameras that are definitely not all conservative outlets at CPAC. And I'm going to point and say, fake news, and then get a cheer. You're so brave. This whole act, it's not working. So you can feel comfort and excitement about that. It's not working, as shown by recent polling. You've pulled that up, Jessiah, so I can read it off. It looks like Ruben Gallego is in a really strong spot here. So a recent poll shows Gallego at 36%. That's up 6 outside the margin of error on Kari Lake. Lake at 30%, Cinema at 21%. And then if you take Cinema out, is that what that other number was? 46% Gallego's at. Ooh, Kari! That's brutal. And and then 37% is where Kari Lake sits. So polling-wise, we're looking good in Arizona for the Senate race. Then money, and I hate how much of a role money plays in politics, but it plays a massive role. Also not looking good for Kari Lake. The Hill reports Gallego raises $3.3 million in fourth quarter, exceeding Lake in Arizona Senate race.
She had about $2 million, to put that in context. So, I mean, like, it's not looking good. And as a matter of fact, I've written articles about this on lukebeasley.show.com, on that website of yours, and you've done videos about this, but the fundraising has been consistently brutal for Kari Lake.
And for Republicans generally, the RNC is just suffering financially, and Trump also suffering. He spent either his campaign or one of his PACs more money, than they're even bringing in.
They spent $50 million on legal fees. $50 million!
Ugh. Which a funny number was, he spent more on legal expenses than Nikki Haley, who's his current competitor in the Republican primary, has spent on her campaign, actually running for president. Pretty dang bonkers. So, before throwing it back to you, Josiah, on this, the good news is this act, this denying elections, degrading the media, etc., it's not working.
No, and what's funny is Republicans seem to forget that there are 2 stages to an election. There's the primary, then the general, right? And Kari Lake's attitude is kind of the embodiment of it. She seems to think that for Donald Trump and the Republican Party at a national level, that the election ends at the primary. But as we've discussed on our shows, I think we've even in collaborative videos, we talked about how the Republican Party has put itself in a position where to have the maximum chance of winning a primary, those same decisions will reduce your chances. Like, they're mutually exclusive. Like, to a Republican, if you really want to win a primary as an elected official, you want to get as crazy as humanly possible and go full tilt MAGA, more than likely. But in so doing, you are taking yourself further away from the general election because, and this is important, MAGA is not the majority. Yep. They think they're the unspoken majority. It's just not true. So I suppose Democrats, in a really roundabout way, probably a little bit grateful that Kari Lake is actually like going full off kilter here, because statistically speaking, it's going to hurt her and Trump and MAGA in general in the general election.
Can I you reminded me of something. This is sort of unrelated, and I don't want this to turn into a whole thing, a whole rant, as these things tend to. But if we can try our best, it's on me, I blame myself. The unspoken majority term used, there is this belief, and I saw in a recent focus group of Republican voters, MAGA voters. Now, I talk to Republican voters, MAGA voters, mostly to say, hey, people who think it's not important to vote and who just casually come across a Trump supporter interview video, this group of individuals will have more power if you stay home. And they'll have more say in your life, in how your government governs you if you stay home. It's less, let's try to understand and sympathize with why they want a dictator. And I'm so sick of the reality that still to this day, even though every institutional advantage is in Republicans' favor, the Senate, the Electoral College, etc., and they get so overrepresented in the government to an insane degree. And still, a lot of mainstream media, not right-wing media, in another way, but mainstream media, spends a lot of time saying, well, but let's try to figure out what it is, what's the truth they're tapping into. Let's hear from these Republican voters. What about hearing, for once, I'm curious, what it is that's bringing people to vote for Joe Biden. Why don't we talk about that? Jessiah?
I thought you said you did not want this to become a whole rant, because it's about to become a whole rant. Because listen, yes, again, that double standard, folks, listen, as a general principle, there are obvious exceptions. I think the principle of empathy is a good one to have, politically speaking, right? I know you talked about this. I know I've talked about this. I have friends and family, people I love dearly, that are not only Republican, but that I would consider as part of the MAGA cult, okay? That's my interpretation of the people that I love in my life. And I do love them, and I do want to understand them, and we're somehow able to navigate, family and friendships despite these enormous political tensions. Understanding is important there, right? But we can't have a one-sided understanding. It can't always be the left and liberals and independents, everybody trying to understand and coddle the right. It has to be reciprocated. And this is an expectation which should be imposed on the Republican Party and the right. Hey, you know what? You want these coastal elite Democrats to understand you? Fine. But you should also try to understand the majority of the country who are more likely to back the Democrat than the Republican, as has been the case in the past 30 years, with the one exception of 2004 when President Bush ran for re-election. You all should try to, the minority should also try to understand the majority, right? It should be a reciprocal thing. And the fact that it's not, the fact that you will never find a good faith, a genuine Fox op-ed or a Fox News documentary in which Martha McCallum or Jesse Waters or whoever runs around LA or New York or just really any densely packed urban area saying, listen, seriously, in good faith, why don't you vote for Donald Trump? What do you like about Joe Biden? And then actually try to engage with the subject. And they never do that.
And Jessiah and I, for the purposes of preparing, political commentary show, have to watch an absurd amount of right-wing media. And one of the things I hear come up constantly is, why 2016? That's why Donald Trump won, because the American people were saying, the silent majority were saying that we want... What about when Joe Biden got more votes than any candidate in the history of 4 states?
But Hillary Clinton also got more votes than Donald Trump in 2016.
What is that saying? What is the fact that the Republican Party has lost 7 out of the last 8 popular votes in the national presidential elections? What does that say? Tap into that. And like you mentioned before, Democrats bend over backwards, and in some sense it's respectable to try to be bipartisan when they're in power, when they have majorities. And they do. The PACT Act, the Chips and Science Act, and the infrastructure law, and the gun safety bill, some of Biden's biggest achievements were bipartisan. And we probably could have done more if we had just ignored that and done carve-outs to the filibuster and done more, but they didn't, because they care a lot about bipartisanship. Then Republicans get into power, and they say, no, we have a mandate. We can do what we want, because we now have a majority with all these crazy institutional advantages that we have, even though they represent just statistically a smaller portion of the country. So yeah, let's work with the minority of the country. Let's work with those who aren't implementing as popular of positions, but also the other way around makes a whole lot of sense too.
Makes maybe even more sense, right? Especially when, the mandate comes from popular consensus and popular consent. But Republicans don't do that. And instead, what the Republican Party at the elected level, at the leadership level, wants to do is just simply depress voter turnout, right? They have rigged the game in their system. They're like, we don't need to appeal to as many people as possible. We can simply hew to these minoritarian institutions and still stand a pretty damn good chance of winning elections. Remember when he said he didn't want this to be a rant? That's what he said. I want you to remember this. When this turns into a 45-minute video, I want you to remember this.
Right.
You brought it up.
You're right. And then when they'll bring up, 2020 Biden won because of mail-in voting. You know what? First of all, shut up. Second of all, sure. Let's go with that. What does that say? It says when people have it a little bit more convenient to vote, and we actually hear the voice of the American people a little bit more accurately because you haven't proven there was any widespread voter fraud, so it was the voice of the American people, Democrats get more votes than any in American history. It's crazy. Let's wrap it up there. I have like 10 more points, but we're wrapping it up there, okay? Jessiah, plug your stuff.
You can find me at youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics. Appreciate the collaboration, Luke.
It's always great.